The perspectives expressed in this podcast are those of the host and guests. The views expressed are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of the National Institute of Health or the United States government.
Hey, Sickle family. I'm Wumi Bakare.
And I'm Dima Hendricks. And we would like to welcome you to the Through the Genes podcast,
where we talk about living, healing, recovering, and exploring curative therapies for sickle cell disease.
We will also talk about our individual curative therapy journeys and the bond that we built as sickle cell sisters.
Episode 3, The Caregiver Perspective with Amanda Olaghere.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Through the Genes. I am your gracious host, Wumi Bakare, and I have
Dima Hendricks here.
So, on today's episode, we have someone who I would like to say she's kind of the number one supporter of a phenomenal sickle cell warrior named Jimi Olaghere, who also participated in the CRISPR gene editing clinical trial in 2020. Amanda is an amazing mom of 3, and she also works in the fintech industry. So, welcome to the show, Amanda.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
Amanda, thank you so much for being here and telling us your story. Now, I just want to start off on some background. And could you describe what it was like for Jimi's life? What was Jimi's life like before the gene therapy process?
Before the gene therapy process, life was so different. And it's kind of hard to think back and realize how different it was to what it is today. Like the further away from it you get, you just kind of forget. It's hard to remember. But I do remember that it was like we were just in a dark storm all the time. It was like this dark cloud was over us and we were in this thunderstorm that we were fighting through together, trying to keep safe, always going to emergency rooms. We were going to emergency rooms like 3-4 times a week, hospital stays like twice a month, something like that. We had it down to a science that we knew when we came home from work, or when I came home from work, Jimmy stayed home, that his pain was at a certain level, we had until such and such time to make a decision, are we going to go to an emergency room or not? And then you have these 5 emergency rooms within a 30-minute drive from us. Which one has the fastest emergency wait time? The doctors work the fastest, the nurses work the fastest. This one gives it this type of pain medication. This nurse is on duty today, so she's going to be really great. And it was almost like you had this menu and you had to do this like calculation of where should we go? And then you always knew, okay, you get there and you're going to be there for, let's say, 5 hours. Okay, is that enough time to then come home and sleep through the night before you have to go to work in the morning? Or do I just call in late? Or do I call out of work altogether? Or do I go to work on no sleep at all? So life was just kind of getting through each day and really just fighting. It was constant fight. I guess that's why you guys are called warriors, right?
Right.
Constant just battling through the day. And that's what life was like before. And now it's like sunshine and rainbows and lollipops. And yeah, I like that sounds so cliche to say, but it really is. Life is so good right now. It is so good. We don't have any of that stuff hanging over our heads. And you don't realize how much that weighs down on you when you're in it, because you just go through it, right? Like you just do the thing. Right. And then when it's not weighing on your back anymore, you're like, oh, this is what other people's lives are like? I didn't know. And now you just have all this extra room to live and be happy and be free and grow as a person, grow as a family, reach your goals. Like you don't have this thing like pulling you back down, right? So life is good.
I like that you kind of highlighted the burden of sickle cell disease, because a lot of the times we just primarily focus on the patient, not necessarily factoring in their spouse and the family unit as a whole. So leading into that, what was the conversation like when Jimi approached you and said, I want to participate in the gene therapy clinical trial? How did that discussion go? And kind of walk us through how you made the decision that he was going to embark on this.
Yeah, so he didn't approach me that he wanted to do it. What happened is he had this article about Victoria Gray from NPR. He said, "Look how interesting this is." And we read the article together, and he was just going to put it away and continue on with his life. And I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa. This woman doesn't have two heads. If she did it, we could do it. Let's look into it." And then I found the phone number of the local hospital that was doing it, which was in Nashville. And we called them up and left a message. And then Jimi had a doctor's appointment the next day with his regular hematologist to ask him, "What do you think of this? Have you heard of it? Do you think I'd be a good fit?" And his doctor was like, "No, actually, they closed that. They're not doing that anymore." Jimmy's like, "Really? They closed it?" He's like, "Yeah, you won't be a good fit. It won't work." So Jimi came home and he's like very defeated, feeling very sad. Later the next day, we get a phone call. It's from Dr. Frangul. And he's like, "Yeah, we're still open and we think you'd be a good fit. We'd like to talk to you more, blah, blah, blah." So we were able to continue. But what was the conversations about that Jimi and I had deciding, should he do this? We talked a lot about risks and the risk of where he is today and the complications that he's experiencing today. They're only going to continue to get worse versus if he goes through with the trial. Best case scenario, he's healed and we can live an amazing life. And we just have this short period of time that we're living through a difficult period going through the trial. Mm-hmm. Worst case scenario, he goes through the trial and something happens and then we address it, right? Like there's no problem that can't be fixed. But the biggest risk with editing your genes or DNA is cancer, right? That they're going to accidentally change a different mutation. Cancer is something that's treatable. We can address it. We can work towards that. So those were the risks that we weighed. Okay. We also talked about like the actual logistics of it. I was 9 months pregnant when we learned about the trial. And so we were having our first baby. And Jimi is a very present he's always wanted to be a father. It's like his lifelong dream to be a dad. Right. So he was like, "I don't want to miss any of this. I'm not leaving you guys for 2, 3, 4 months. I'm staying with you. You're coming with me. You're staying in the hospital with me. You're going to every single thing with me." So if they can't guarantee me that, that's a deal breaker. Mm-hmm. So we talked to them and they were like, "Yeah, of course, that's not a problem. We're a pediatric hospital. We love kids." Yeah. So yeah, it was really great. Another thing was work. So Jimi owns his own business. He needed to find somebody to help him manage the business while he was away. I am a full-time mom, so I was already working remotely, but I had to get approval from my team to be able to work from a hospital, which is different than working in an office in your house. Of course. But they were really fantastic. I had a really great team that supported me and picked up the slack when I wasn't able to. So that was really great. So yeah, those are the considerations were the risks of what would happen if things were to go bad with the trial. It was his work, my work, and the baby.
Mm. So you talked about family and being pregnant during this whole process. Now, did you and Jimi talk about fertility preservation, or was there any fertility or sperm banking that was involved during this process?
That's a great question. It is something that they offer and include, and Jimi did take advantage of that. But we were already doing IVF, so we didn't need it. Like we already had everything frozen and ready to go for all future babies. But if we ever needed additional sperm, we can go back to the sperm bank and get it from there.
Okay. I love that. To be honest with you, the more you talk, the more I'm like, it seemed like all the stars aligned when it came to Jimi's clinical trial because you had done IVF proactively. Mm-hmm. So that was already kind of secured. You had, at the time you're like, I work remote, you run your own business. So technically it's not necessarily like we're having to live a job and for extended a period of time. And, do we get paid time off? All of the stars, it sounded, was aligned. But I'm keen to know, as a caregiver, and a caregiver who was 9 months pregnant at that, I would imagine that juggling a pregnancy along with watching your husband about to go through a life-changing, transformative process, that would have weighed on you. How did kind of your family and friends support you as you guys embarked on this journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we had them come when Jimmy actually had the chemo done. That was in September. So my son was 9 months old at the time.
Okay.
They, my family actually came with me to Nashville. And the idea was that I was going to work from the hotel room and they would stay in the hospital with Jimmy and the baby.
Okay.
During the day. But they told us because it's a pediatric oncology unit, you can only have one person. So it was just me that was allowed to stay in the hospital. So it was, they were there for me to support me, but they weren't able to the way that we planned on it. But I don't know. I thought this was kind of just a universal, like a woman thing, but maybe I'm just crazy. I just have like this delusional idea that I can just do whatever comes at me, right? Like you just do it, right? Anything that comes to you, we'll just figure it out. So what? I have a 3-month-old baby and we're in the hospital and Jimmy's having this clinical trial and oh yeah, there's like a tornado in the middle of the night in Nashville. That's okay. I can work the next day. It'll be fine. That's how life goes, right?
Yeah. I mean, as women, we are nurturers and our like motherly instincts kind of kick in from when we're in our teenage years. So it makes sense that for you, you are just kind of like, all right, let's do this.
Let's just do it.
Let's do it.
Well, did you gather any coping skills during this season? Because there seemed to be a lot. I know it sounds very resilient, but were there any tools that you kind of equipped yourself with during this time?
One thing I had to learn during this process was how to not be in charge, how to let go of control. So like talking about work, I would have these meetings set up throughout the day and you'd want to just, be focused, like boss girl, I'm just going to do my meeting. Everything in the background is just in the background, but that's not how life works. The baby's going to cry. They're going to want to sit on mommy's lap and Jimmy's going to have a nurse come in and do his IVs and there's just things going on. So you have to let go of control and just be like, sorry, this is my life right now. I'm working through it. I'm still able to help you the best I can. But when I can't, I have a team that I can lean on. And that wasn't something that I was particularly great at prior to the trial, leaning on other people for help and just letting go of control. So that's something that I developed, I think, during this process.
Okay. Now let's talk through timeline, because one of the things you mentioned is at the time when you were starting, all right, let's figure out the eligibility criteria, do the informed consent process, you were 9 months pregnant, and then by the time you guys were embarking on that journey in hospital, your son was 3 months. So the reality is I just want to give the audience an opportunity to understand the timeline, that from when you start the process to when it actually starts taking place, there are some measures and protocols that happen during that period, just to give a little bit of clarity there. But now let's walk us through the pre, during, and post process. Which of those processes were the most challenging for you and your family? And I can imagine that the conditioning regimen, going through chemotherapy as a wife, was not easy to experience. Even though you had experienced his vaso-occlusive crises and pain episodes, you hadn't necessarily seen Jimmy lose hair and have mouth sores and all the other side effects of chemotherapy. So can you kind of paint a picture of what that period was like for you?
Yeah. So to zoom out, the whole process from the time that we called up Dr. Frankel's office to say that we were interested to the time that Jimmy walked out of the hospital with his new DNA was 11 months.
Okay.
So I was 9 months pregnant when we called Dr. Frankel. The first time we went in for Jimmy to do his testing to see if he's eligible, Sebastian was a month old, maybe like 3 weeks, something like that. And then we started going for, they have to collect the DNA. And we did that every 4 weeks, I want to say, maybe every 4 to 5 weeks. Plus he had to have full blood exchanges every 3 weeks. So we ended up going to Nashville maybe like every 2 to 3 weeks. We were there really often for like a full 4 or 5 months we were there. And then once they collected all of the DNA, they sent it off to Boston to go get edited. And that was with them for a couple of months while we continued to go for full blood exchanges. And then in August, we went in and did some workup. And then we actually lived in the hospital for a full month from September, which was September 14th, was Jimi's birthday when we checked in. We were there for a full month. And then once we checked out of there, we still stayed in the Nashville area for another month.
Okay.
Yeah. For another month, for him to continue going for blood work and checkups before we were allowed to go home.
Okay.
And I think we went home right before Thanksgiving. Watching Jimi go through the conditioning process where they give him chemo was really difficult. I think especially for Jimi, he went in and he was like, he has this really strong mental toughness where he's like, I'm going to kick this chemo's butt. This isn't going to touch me. I'm not going to have any of the side effects. And that's great. That's kind of what you need to go into. You need to have like this resilient mindset and not like this is going to be awful. Because if you think it's going to be awful, it's going to be awful, right? It's going to be awful no matter what you think. But if you start thinking it's going to be awful, it's not going to get better.
Right.
So it was great that he had this mental toughness. But after like the second day of him having chemo and he didn't have any side effects, he was like, yeah, doc, I got this and nothing's going to touch me. And he really was like on this high of like, I'm going to be the exception to chemo's not going to have any side effects for me. And on day 3, it like really kicked his butt. Like he started to get mouth sores and his complexion started to darken, and it all happened really fast after that, like day 3 of how he was feeling. It went down really quickly. And I think it was kind of demoralizing for him to think like he was invincible and then to realize that he's not. Now, we know that this is all just a temporary phase, so it wasn't like with sickle cell, when you're going through your crisis, it feels like it's going to be forever because there is no solution and you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. So with the chemo, you know this is just temporary. But it doesn't help how you feel in the moment, right? Like you can't eat, you can't sleep, you have pain in your mouth. Like he was literally taking pictures every day of what his mouth looked like to be like, this is crazy. I have to see what's causing this pain. I have to see this. This is out of control. The complexion was a big deal for him. He didn't like how dark he was getting. His hair falling out, he couldn't believe it. Like the hair wasn't a big deal. It was like the eyebrows and the eyelashes falling out that was mind-boggling for him. But he was hoping that once everything started growing back in, that like his beard would come in nice and strong, and it did. It came in good. But yeah, it was hard to see him like that, right? Like to see how much pain he's in. There's really no amount of like pain medication that can help with how your mouth feels. And they're giving you the, I forget what it's called, TPN, something like that. They're giving you the food through the tube, but that doesn't make your stomach feel full. It's just giving you the nutrition that you need, right? So he's hungry all the time, but doesn't want to eat because he's nauseous. It was really difficult. There was one night that he just had like enough. He was like, that's it. I want to eat something. I can't just go on not eating. And let's order something. Let's find something we can order. And you would think like, okay, you have mouth sores. Let's think strategically about this. Like maybe mashed potatoes or applesauce or ice cream. No. My husband ordered a spicy chicken sandwich.
Ooh, that's brave. Bold.
Brave is a choice of words. Yeah, I'll go with brave. It was like the middle of the night that he's like, okay, I'm going to do this. And he took this big bite and he was like, oh, that was an immediately bad idea. So we had to call the doctor in the middle of the night to give him pain medication to get through that because that was bad, real bad. But yeah, it was hard to see him go through that.
Wow. So I couldn't only imagine living with my baby, you and your husband who's going through this process in the hospital. Tell me, how were you able to adjust having a home life and now bringing your family into this hospital life dynamic?
Yeah. It was a hard adjustment. So we tried to set up the hospital room as comfortable as possible. So no shoes allowed. Everybody has slippers when they come in the room. We had a big playpen set up for Sebastian, not like the pack and plays, but like literally a fenced in area with like padding so he can just, roam and be free. And we had our Facebook portal so he could watch whatever shows he wanted to. We could constantly video with our family as easy as we wanted. We would make our beds every morning and like put the bed away so that it doesn't feel like you're in your bedroom. It feels like you're in a living room. We leaned on having things outsourced. So like our laundry, we had somebody do, which we were really lucky to be able to afford to do, but like you just send it out, somebody picks it up and they drop it off nice and folded and like smelling nice and fresh. The clinical trial took care of our food, like they reimburse you for your food. So I didn't have to think about cooking at all. We just ordered food for pretty much every meal for the 2 months that we were living in Nashville. For things that we didn't order, like breakfast, you don't want to order too much breakfast. We would like just do grocery deliveries and like formula and stuff. All of that was delivered. So having a lot of things that you can outsource to other people was useful. But I do recognize that that's a luxury that not everybody can do, right? And then we also, Sebastian and I would take walks every single day. Even if it was raining, we would go out for a walk, get some fresh air, just walk around and see where it is that we live, maybe go get a cup of coffee or walk over to the park and just get some fresh air out of the room. That was kind of our routine.
It sounds like one of the things you mentioned earlier on is you said, I had to let go of control. And even by the act of outsourcing things alleviates the amount of worries that you have on your plate. Because again, you're only one person and juggling motherhood, also being a wife, but also being an employee, it's just a lot of tasks to be handling all at once. And I'm glad that you handled it with grace and poise, even though at certain times I can see it's drumming up some emotions for you, because again, you're having to relieve a moment that, as transformative as it was also grueling on not just your spouse, but on yourself as well. And the amazing thing of like young kids is they'll never remember this.
Yeah.
So it can just be part of your love story with Jimi, and the kid was there, but he would never remember this. All he'll remember is his father being well and present and hands-on. But I want for a second for you to pull back a layer a little bit, kind of talk us through your mental health specifically, because a lot of times we focus so much on the patient that we ignore the caregiver. And I would imagine that given that you were the only one in the hospital with him, at certain times, watching a loved one going through a difficult time and not being able to do anything, there's a certain level of helplessness that you feel. So for you, how did you make sure that you were your best self? Because you don't want to cry, because you don't want the cast of your sadness to weigh on Jimi, but at the same time, you can't always fake a smile, especially when you have a series of doctors and nurses telling you different results at different points in time. So kind of walk us through, or as I would say, peel back the layers of your mental health and some of the emotions that came up for you, and how did you navigate them at the time?
Well, to add on to those layers motherhood was a new thing to me, and I'm still like in the throes of like hormones are going everywhere. You're only a few months in. So that I think was very stressful for me. Probably that was the most emotional part. It was just going through the ups and downs of motherhood. The trial itself was more exciting for me. Even though it's hard to see Jimi like this, I know that he's not at risk. I know that he's safe. He has a great team of medical doctors around him, protecting him and caring for him and watching him. So while it's always hard to see somebody that you love in pain, I wasn't scared the way that I was prior to the trial, right? Like when he was having a sickle cell crisis and we would go to the emergency rooms, that was hard because nobody's caring for him the way that you want them to, right? And you're afraid that if they don't take care of him correctly, that his life is at risk. And you're scared of what the future is going to look like. You're scared of, the medical debt that this is putting you in. And there's all these things that weighs on you. But the trial wasn't like that. The trial was very hopeful for me. Like we were very excited about life and the possibility of life after. We enjoyed it, getting to know a new city. Like Nashville became a second home to us for a whole year. We really tried, whenever Jimi would have to go for the blood exchanges and the collection, we would stay for like a day before and a day after, and we would just go see Nashville and try new foods and see new places. So we tried to take advantage of it, to enjoy. So the trial wasn't a burden on me in terms of like my mental health and my emotions.
Okay.
Probably motherhood and managing work through all of this was difficult.
Okay.
But I wasn't afraid for Jimi's safety the way that I was prior to the trial.
Okay.
Wow, that brings a lot of hope. I can
Mhm.
only imagine how you feel. Like,
Yeah.
I'm looking at you now, and I can see that there's such a relief in knowing from previous, like before, and then there's now. So before we get into the now, I want to know your thought process, or if you can elaborate on um, the day that you left the hospital,
Mm.
a joyous occasion. Walk me through, walk us through that. Tell us what you were feeling.
Okay, let me just mentally rewind back to that day in my head. So Jimi had the DNA implanted into him. They do it through like a syringe. They do 3 or 4 syringes, and then you have to wait for the new DNA to engraft. That takes like 3 weeks to happen, and then they need to see a trend of like your white blood cells going back up, something like that. We were looking for like a certain number, and I can't remember what the number was or what the count was, but we were waiting for that to happen. And I remember they came in, Dr. Dom came in one day and she told us, "Oh, we did it. You're at this number." And we were just so excited, jumping up and down. And now the next step is that we're allowed to move out, which Jimi was super excited to do. He just wanted to leave the hospital, like being stuck in this room, and literally, like, he couldn't even go over to the kitchen. I think he was allowed to walk around the hallway, like go around the nurse's station just to get some exercise, but he wanted fresh air, for a month to be staying in one room and with like everybody going in and out. And remember, we're like in the middle of COVID. So you're not seeing anybody's faces. Everybody has to wear masks all the time. So that, I think we were super, super excited to pack up and leave. I think we were like packing up 2 days before, just in case, like as soon as they tell us we're ready to go, we're going to get out of here. Yeah, we were really excited. And then we pack up all our things, and then we went and found the apartment that they had set up for us, and we got ourselves settled in there. We were able to do grocery shopping, and it was just so freeing to have more space and to have fresh air and to be able to continue on in our journey of like what life is like post transplant. But Jimi still was, even after we left the hospital, he was still feeling a lot of nausea. He couldn't really eat that much. We were still having a hard time getting him to have nutritious food. Like, he just wanted to eat because he had to eat. There wasn't anything he was craving to eat. It was I think that lasted probably for like 3 or 4 months after we left the hospital, that it was hard to get him to eat.
So it sounds like the interesting thing is that feeling you shared is a feeling that I'm very familiar with. I felt like during my process, I almost felt like I was breaking out of jail. I was like, "Thank you, God, I'm free, free at last." Because it does start to take a toll when all you see are those like beige hospital walls and nurses and doctors coming in and out. But one of the things you mentioned is some of the side effects and symptoms that Jimi was still dealing post curative therapy. And I want us to get into that a little bit. And also, I do want to give a bold disclaimer because Jimi participated in a clinical trial. It was able to alleviate a lot of the financial costs. For example, feeding, transportation, room and board. Because again, a lot of families are wondering, how am I going to financially afford this? So I'm going to ask you.
I never heard of a clinical trial that gave an apartment.
Same.
So this is my first. I'm blown away.
Yeah, I mean, they were giving us a hotel room, but because we needed to stay for such a long period of time, I think it was like financially easier for them to do an apartment. And this was an apartment building that specialized in post-medical stays. So like they had the HEPA filter and they had elevators. So like when people have surgeries, they go there to recover so they can go back and forth easily to the hospital. But yeah, we were very, very lucky to be able to have all of these things taken care of. I don't know how we would have done it without it, because like you said, it's so expensive to be traveling back and forth. Like people were flying back and forth. We rented a car each time, so we drove, which that gets very expensive too. Even if you're using your own car, the fuel, the miles, all of that, it's a lot. The time away from your work is a lot. The food is a lot. We were really lucky that we were able to order in food and not have to worry about cooking, because if you have to cook, you have to get a hotel room that has a kitchen, which they'll charge you more for that, right?
Of course.
It's not easy to do something like this. And you're right. We're very, very fortunate that we did it within the bounds of the clinical trial, and that they took such good care of us.
Yeah, I'm impressed by that, because a lot of times, even I always, say this to future prospective patients. Even though it's a clinical trial, I always recommend that they do some saving, because the reality is there will always be miscellaneous costs, things you never plan for. Case in point, if another caregiver has to fly in to switch roles, those are expenses. If you were to say, if you drove your car, for example, the car could break down, you needed service. So there are just this cost that you didn't necessarily plan for or factor in that tend to happen. So thank you for kind of explaining what the protocol was for all of these expenses to be covered for you and your family, because that will take off a significant amount of burden that could have been added and stress to what you were already going through. But now let's talk about Jimmy's symptoms. Now, if you take a look at some of the things he was experiencing during the clinical trial, it did take his body, as you said, like 2 to 4 months to slowly start to bounce back. But if you were to look at Jimi from a lens of preclinical trial and post-clinical trial, what are some of the mind-blowing things that you've seen that has significantly changed? I know in the past, Jimi has mentioned a lot of times I'd be, in pain and on the bed, and my wife would have to like leave food for me, like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So kind of talk us through some of his symptoms pre and post, so that we kind of have an idea of what the recovery process was like holistically.
So Jimmy is not the same person that he was before. Like nothing about him is the same. His mental state is not the same. Prior to the trial, he was severely depressed, lots of anxiety, all understandable with what he was going through. Now, I mean, everybody has their own mental health that they are trying to work through, but that is not who he is or where he is today. He has this mental toughness about him. I will say because he had this trial done, he now thinks that he's like a robot, and like he doesn't have anything that can penetrate him, and he shouldn't have anything that penetrates him. So whenever like a normal person would be vulnerable, like, oh, I'm tired, I should go to sleep, he's like, no, I have so much energy, I'm gonna go do 5 more chores before I go to bed or whatever. But prior to the trial, like you said, he had no energy. He had all of his like energy in his body was just going towards surviving the day, just getting through the day, like keeping his heart beating and all that stuff. So he literally was laying in bed all day. I would, before I leave for work, leave him breakfast, lunch, and snacks and drinks throughout the room, so he has the ability to get it. He's forced to get up and walk around a little bit, get his body moving around. But now, like, literally, he bought a business a couple weeks ago, and he's been there like 12 to 14 hours a day. Oh, wow. Running this business. That's not even something that we would consider before. Like, he's literally on his feet 12 to 14 hours a day. Wow. I can't do that. And I don't have sickle cell, and I can't do that, right? Like, that's hard. He comes home and he's tired, but sleep repairs him. And now when he wakes up in the morning, he's a new person. That's not how it was, right? You know this. Yeah. If you go through something that's tough on your body, it takes weeks to get over that, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you're paying for if it's cold out. We were talking about this morning. If it's cold out, it takes weeks to recover from that. He's standing in this building without a jacket, and the doors open and everything. And he's like, yeah, it's nice. I get like the nice, refreshing, crisp air. Like, what? Who are you?
What? So you traded your husband for a superhuman, which sounds like a win-win situation to me.
I mean, it's been great in terms of like Jimmy's always been a great partner, but now as a mom of three, like you really need somebody that can go in there and be running the house with you, being a parent with you. And I am so lucky. Jimmy is more than doing his share of what anybody would expect of a spouse. Like he does so much around the house and he's super hands-on with the kids, like playing with them all the time. And he's an amazing father, an amazing partner. And people ask all the time about like, how do you raise what our kids are twins? We have a 4-year-old and 2-year-old twins. They're like, how do you do twins? How do you do 3 kids? I'm like, well, I wouldn't do it on my own. Like if it was just me doing this, I could not. There's no question. I only can do this because I have Jimmy as a partner. And I wouldn't have been able to do that prior to the trial. Not a question.
That's amazing. That is
Yeah.
amazing. And to hear a warrior talk about crisp air and be okay, or form war, that is amazing to me. That is a cure right there.
We're going to Boston in January and he's excited.
Ooh.
He's excited. I mean, I'm excited too, but like, he's not worried about like, it's going to be so cold and whatever. He's excited.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So all of these wonderful things are happening in your life, and we're hearing how it was pre gene therapy and now post is just, is a great book ending story. It's a great story ending.
Yeah.
And I feel full in just hearing your story and how this amazing medical miracle has impacted your life. How does it make you feel to see your family so complete and whole?
So grateful. I feel so grateful that I have this life. Like we started this conversation about what was life before and after the trial. And I said, it's sunshine and lollipops and rainbows. And I really do feel like that. Like there is nothing I can complain about in life. Life is so good. And I also feel like there's nothing that we can't do. Like that delusion that I had of whatever happens, we can figure it out. It's even more delusional. Like I feel like it just fed into itself. Like if we could get through the trial, the way that we did, we can get through anything. Like there's literally nothing that can be put in front of me that our family can't conquer. I'm really excited for the potential of what the rest of our life has to offer. Talking about what life was before and what life is like now. Prior to the trial, we did very few vacations because it was hard to go on a plane for an extended period of time. Maybe 2 hours you can do from like New Jersey to Florida or something like that. But now this summer, or this fall, I should say, we took a 9-hour flight with all 3 kids from Atlanta to Paris. We took the kids on a trip. We did a Mexico trip, and we're just doing all this traveling, and Jimmy doesn't need time to recover. He's like carrying the kids through the airport. Like it's crazy. It's really exciting to see. And it's also exciting to be able to take it for granted, right? Like that I don't have to think about, oh, are we going to have to recover? Are we going to have downtime in the hospital? Are we going to need to know where all the hospitals are when we get there, right? Like, just to give you a comparison, our honeymoon, we're married 12 years now. So 12 years ago, we went on our honeymoon on a cruise. And one of the stops that we took, we were out walking around for a couple of hours, and it's June, so it's super hot out. And we go back to the ship, and Jimmy's not feeling well at all. And now he tells me that he has shooting pains up and down his arm. His chest feels like he can't breathe, like something's on his chest. So he's having a heart attack. So we bring him to the doctor's office, there on the ship. They can't access any lines. They had to take the needle and stab him. Like he almost died on our honeymoon, Wow. And that was just on a cruise. We weren't flying anywhere. We were just on a ship. And now we can fly to Europe with our kids and have an amazing life. So yes, I feel very hopeful. I feel really excited about all the things that life has to offer. And I feel like we can conquer anything.
I think this is a full circle moment, because what it sounds like is for such a long time, Jimmy was almost walking in the dark. And I hate to phrase it like that, because there are patients who living with sickle cell is still their day-to-day journey. But now what makes me incredibly joyful is that he's grabbing life by the horns now. And there's a certain level of control. And sickle cell brings on this unpredictability where you don't know if you're going to end up in the hospital that night. So you almost have to be proactive and pack a bag at all times, because it's just sickle cell just chooses to always show up at the worst times. I can imagine for him, that's a honeymoon. That's a moment when you really want to bond with your spouse. And then to be ill on a ship where you recognize we are in the middle of water. There is no air ambulance that's going to pick me up and take me to where I can get the best care. Or again, they were having access issues. So that would have been a very traumatic moment for him. But one beautiful thing I always say is sometimes dark times and challenges replenish or create a bond that is simply unbreakable, because
Yeah.
you've both walked through the fire together. And in that, I think your marriage, the foundation of your marriage is now like rock solid. It's dried, it's not going anywhere, because you've walked through what were dark periods, and now everything feels lighter. Everything, you're almost excited to be present and in the moment and taking snapshots in your head, because it sounds like for him it was literally day and night. And one of the hallmarks of sickle cell disease is chronic pain. And so what excites me is, as people will know, we're, the goal of this show is to continue to educate audiences. So a lot of the nuances of sickle cell disease is altitude is a trigger. And so when you mentioned before we get to a place, we have to Google like what hospitals are in the area. Now it sounds like he's been able to rule out pain from his life. His fatigue is on the back burner now. Some of those day-to-day difficulties of sickle cell are now in behind him in the rear view mirror, and he can just continue to live fulfilled, present, but more importantly, be the father he always wanted to be. um
Yeah.
and so I'm so thankful that you shared your story with us, because it will, for one, give a lot of people hope, men and women alike. But in this space that we're in, and I'm sure Dima can speak to this as well, there aren't a lot of male warriors who are strong in their masculinity enough to say, I'm dealing with this, but it doesn't make me weak as a man, because we socially groom and condition men to be the provider, to be the backbone, not to show their weakness. So for this to happen to such a champion within the advocacy space is a celebration for us all. And Dim and I were smiling as you were speaking, because it, not only does it rejuvenate our hope for what's to come, but it makes me excited that future
Yeah.
warriors
Good.
no longer
Yeah.
need a donor to go through this clinical trial process. If they choose that it is for them, they can embark on this journey, and that is what they can look forward to. But now I need an honest answer before we wrap. Are there any symptoms today that Jimmy still deals with? Because as you age, the complications of sickle cell disease get worse. I know for some patients like myself, I'm still dealing with iron overload because I had so many frequent blood transfusions prior to the curative therapy. So, are there any small symptoms that you notice? Maybe it could be brain fog, or which they always say is an extension of chemo brain, where you just like get into a room and be like, why am I here again? Are there any symptoms that you still see him dealing with, or how frequent are his hematology visits now? And when they do happen, what are some of the things on the radar that his doctors are still paying close attention to make sure he's continuing to recover in the right way?
Um, Prior to the trial, he had a bilateral vascular necrosis. So his hips
Oh,
were like the joints were bone on bone.
right.
That has not resolved itself. But obviously, like he needs to get a hip replacement in order for that to be resolved. So he still has hip pain. So if we do a lot of walking, he does feel pain in his hips. That is related to the sickle cell, but it's not like a sickle cell crisis that he's having.
Yes.
He's had some pain, um, maybe like a little bit, but it might just be like aches and pains of being a 38-year-old man now, right? Like
Yeah.
with 3 kids and running businesses.
Mm.
But he reverts back to the it's like we call it abaniki. It's from Nigeria, but it's kind of like icy hot, like the menthol cream um, that he uses to just rub wherever he's having pain. So
Mhm.
that's what he used his whole life for pain relief,
Mhm.
in addition to the pain medications. But we don't have one pill in our house anymore, so he doesn't need it. Like, can you imagine living in a house without it. Like prior to, it was always like, oh my gosh, what if I run out? What if we're on a trip and we don't have anything? Like that was a big part of our life, was thinking about how he's going to manage his pain. And now he doesn't really think about that much. What other side effects does he have? He goes to therapy to make sure that okay, so one of the things that he thought about when he was going to go do this trial was, so much of my identity is based in pain and sickle cell and people telling me you can't do it, so you've got to do it, right? So he went to therapy to help him through that and like continue to make sure that he didn't lose his identity and that he knew who he was. So I think, and that's just mental health, right? Like everybody needs to take care of their mental health. But that's something that's continued after the trial. What else? Yeah, the pain is really low. He does have days where he doesn't have an appetite.
Okay.
But not like it was back then. Like he may have like 2 or 3 days where he doesn't really have an appetite, and then he'll remember, oh, tacos exist. Yeah, I'll have that. You know, trying to think what else is there yeah, that's about it. I think probably the damage that was done to his body prior to the trial, the damage is still there. That's not really repairable. You have to live with that. So the earlier you can get any repair done, so like if you can do the DNA editing, if you can do a bone marrow transplant, the earlier you can do it in your life, the better, so that your body isn't sustaining all this damage. And also you don't have to go through all of the trauma of like dealing with the medical field and the racism in the medical field, and like nobody needs that, right? Like, so the earlier you can have a cure, the better. That's, I know what the goal is to try and roll this out to the younger demographics, so that they don't have to go through a whole life of pain. So yeah, he's doing good. No real pain, just everyday aches and pains and hip problems.
Okay.
Yeah.
No chemo fog, to answer your question.
Okay.
His brain is super sharp.
Good to know. But I think we needed to highlight that, because I also want to share the reality of the lived experience is that, yes, the other symptoms won't get worse, but it doesn't mean it's a bibbity bobbity boo moment where they just completely disappear. So I'm glad that you highlighted he still deals with avascular necrosis from time to time, a little bit of joint pain here and there. But again, nothing that you can't manage or he's not been able to manage on his own in comparison to sickle cell. Dima?
Right.
Yeah. So now we heard all of the wonderful things that are happening and we hear the possibilities. Now you're able to plan a future. So what does the future hold for Amanda and Jimi?
Well, we're trying to build businesses. We're loving our life with our kids, trying to travel and show them the world. Jimi has Jimmy's been into rowing lately. We have a rowing machine, so he wants to maybe learn how to row out on the open water. He has this dream of like becoming a pilot, just taking lessons to learn how to fly a plane.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Like the fact that he can have these dreams and like actually follow through on them, it's very exciting. Just, I don't know, being in the moment and having a normal family that doesn't center itself around the hospital is really exciting for us. And having the bandwidth to have hobbies and enjoy our kids, that's what we're excited for.
I love that. The future is very bright for him, and we hope all of his hopes and dreams come true. Well, I know Jimi, he's really resilient, so more than likely they're gonna work out.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for sharing your story. I think I'm very happy you brought up implicit bias and racism within the healthcare ecosystem. It's a conversation that we will never stop discussing and addressing, because we need healthcare workers to see our chronic illness, not our race first, because oftentimes they tend to see the color of our skin before they diagnose and treat our chronic illness. So thank you so much for sharing that. This has been joyous to hear, but more importantly, I think you have given our listeners a key takeaway of what the gene therapy process is like from a caregiver's point of view. Because a lot of time we read more so about the patient, but we don't get a chance to hear from the closest person to the patient, which is their support system. And I would only imagine that your family, it's also a relief for them, because especially because sickle cell dictated your life for so long. Now it feels like it's limitless, literally.
You're
So
right.
thank you so much,
That's
Amanda.
a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Well, Dima, thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun. I've loved chatting with you guys.
Thank you for
Likewise.
joining us.
On the next episode of Through the Genes, we'll sit down with clinical trial specialist Dr. Katerina Minetti.
Who is the ideal patient coming into the clinical trial? Because you have to be sick enough to get the gene therapy, but you can't be too sick that it would do something to your body or it will fail. So it's like it's like a tightrope. Who's the ideal?
You're right. Yes, you're right. It's like Goldilocks. Too little, too much, just right.
We'll also have a conversation with Genesis Jones as she shares her unique perspective on her transplant journey.
Through the Genes is funded by the National Human Genome Research Institute, part of the National Institutes of Health, through the Democratizing Education for Sickle Cell Disease Gene Therapy Project. Don't forget to follow Sickle Cell Prodigy and Through the Pain Inc. for additional resources and initiative updates. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Through the Genes.